All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a turning point in history that sounds, well, a little too celebratory for what it really was. The Glorious Revolution. I mean, who came up with that name, right?
Uh, yeah, it does kind of sound like something you'd see on like a parade banner, doesn't it?
Totally. But behind that kind of triumphant name is a story full of power struggles and religious tension and political maneuvering. And that's exactly what we're going to untangle today.
We're going beyond the textbook version, We've got a research plan here that digs deep, and I gotta say, it gets pretty juicy. We're talking primary sources, different perspectives, the whole shebang.
And the big question we're tackling, was it truly glorious? And was it even really a revolution?
Yeah, I mean, those are really the million-dollar questions.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. Take us back to England before all this revolution business went down.
Mhm.
What was the situation like?
Okay, picture this. It's the late 1600s. England, a predominantly Protestant country, finds itself with a Catholic king on the throne, James II. And let me tell you, this was not just like oh, different denominations, no big deal kind of situation.
Yeah, this was a time when religion and politics were like totally intertwined.
Right. I mean, it was a huge deal. And James II, he wasn't exactly shy about trying to strengthen the position of Catholicism.
Yeah, the research mentions these declarations of indulgence that he issued, basically suspending laws that were discriminatory towards Catholics and even some other non-Church of England Protestants.
And this really freaked out a lot of Protestants, understandably. They'd seen this before. It brought back all these fears of a Catholic resurgence, going back to when their faith was, really under threat.
I mean, it makes sense. This wasn't just like a sudden burst of religious tension either, right? This has been brewing for a while.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's this thing called the exclusion crisis, and it happened even before James II took the throne.
Okay, tell me more about this exclusion crisis. What went down there?
Well, Parliament at the time was mostly Protestant, and they were so worried about the idea of a Catholic king that they actually tried to, get this, exclude James from the line of succession entirely.
Whoa, they went straight for the source. Bold move.
It was. It ultimately didn't work. James still became king, but it shows you just how deep these religious and political divisions already were. They were simmering under the surface, just waiting to boil over.
So we've got religious tension, we've got a king who seems pretty set on his agenda. But was it just James II's religion that was causing problems? Or was his governing style also a factor in this whole mess?
Oh, his governing style definitely didn't help things. He often just bypassed Parliament entirely, acting like he had, absolute power.
Oh, that wouldn't go over well, I imagine.
Not at all. I mean, especially for those who believed in a more balanced system of government where Parliament has a real say. It looked like he was trying to grab power, impose his will, regardless of what the people or their elected representatives wanted, and then enter the game changer. James II has a son.
A son, oh boy. The research really emphasizes how this threw everyone into a frenzy.
Well, yeah, because up to this point, it was just James II. People could kind of hope that things might change after he was gone. But now...
A Catholic dynasty? The stakes just got way higher.
Exactly. It wasn't just about one king anymore. It was about the future of England, a future potentially ruled by a long line of Catholic monarchs. And at this point, some key English figures are getting, well, desperate.
They knew they had to do something drastic. And that something drastic involves a secret plea to William of Orange, James II's Protestant son-in-law. Talk about family drama.
Right. I mean, can you imagine those conversations? But this wasn't just some family feud. It was about the future of England. They believed, truly believed, that a Catholic dynasty would be disastrous for the country.
They were willing to risk everything,
Right.
even inviting a foreign prince to invade.
And that's exactly what happened. William sets sail with an army. He lands in England, and it's not exactly a social call. So how did the English react?
Well, it was mixed. Some remained loyal to James, of course. But a lot of people welcomed William with open arms. I mean, they saw him as like a savior, someone who could restore a Protestant monarchy and, more importantly, protect their liberties.
And here's where it gets really interesting. See, James II had actually been strengthening his army for years, probably figuring, I might need this one day.
Yeah.
But it really backfired.
Oh, so.
Well, for one thing, it made people nervous. They saw it as a threat to their freedom. And when William arrived, well, not only did he have his own army, but some of James II's troops actually switched sides.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
Right. James is trying to consolidate power, protect himself, and it ends up being a major reason for his downfall. I mean, the whole thing just crumbles. He ends up fleeing to France, leaving the throne empty and England in complete chaos.
What a dramatic exit. Okay, so picture it. James II is out, hightailing it to France. The throne is sitting there empty. What happens next? Who gets to rule England now?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. They convene this special assembly called the Convention Parliament. And their job is to figure out what to do with this whole mess, this vacant throne.
I bet William of Orange had some thoughts on the matter. He didn't march an army all the way to England just to sit on the sidelines, right?
Oh, definitely not. He had a big part to play in what happened next. With his, shall we say, encouragement, Parliament ends up offering the crown to him and his wife Mary, who is James II's daughter.
It's like a royal switcheroo. Out with the Catholic king, in with the Protestant daughter and her husband.
Exactly. And it's a pretty unusual situation, this joint monarchy, but it's a way to ensure a Protestant succession, which is what a lot of people wanted. And it also acknowledges, in a big way, that Parliament was the one who made this happen. It wasn't just some behind-the-scenes deal.
So a new king, a new queen, a huge shift in the balance of power. But the research emphasizes that the changes went way deeper than just like swapping out the monarchs.
Yeah, for sure. The Glorious Revolution really forced England to grapple with some fundamental questions about government. I mean, it was like this huge existential crisis.
An existential crisis for a whole country. That's intense. What kind of questions were they wrestling with?
Well, things like, what are the limits of a monarch's power? What rights do citizens actually have? And who gets to decide all this?
Those are pretty big questions. And it sounds like Parliament didn't just sit around and contemplate these questions. They actually took action. The research talks about this thing called the Declaration of Rights. What was that all about?
The Declaration of Rights, it was basically a list of all the ways James II had messed up, all his abuses of power. Bypassing Parliament, meddling with elections, trying to control the army, the whole 9 yards. It was a way of saying, look, this is not okay. These are violations of the rights of the English people.
So it was more than just a list of grievances. It was a statement of principles, like
Yeah.
this is what we stand for, this is what we won't tolerate. And this declaration, it set the stage for something even bigger, right? The Bill of Rights.
Yes, exactly. The Bill of Rights, it's like they took those principles from the Declaration and turned them into law. And that's huge. It established Parliament's supremacy over the monarchy, meaning no king or queen could just do whatever they wanted anymore. They couldn't just trample on people's rights.
And it's not just some dusty old document. It's still relevant today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it still shapes the relationship between the Crown and Parliament in the UK.
Absolutely. And it's not just about those big political structures either. The Bill of Rights also includes protections for individual freedoms, like freedom of speech. I mean, that's something we still care about deeply today, right? And it's wild to think that people were fighting for those rights and putting them into law over 300 years ago.
It really shows how those ideas have this incredible staying power, this ability to, transcend time.
Yeah.
But they didn't just appear out of nowhere, right?
Nope. They were very much a product of the intellectual climate of the time. There were people thinking about these things, writing about them, debating them.
And the research mentions John Locke as one of the key figures here.
Mhm.
How did his ideas influence the Glorious Revolution?
John Locke, he was this brilliant political philosopher, and his ideas were like, I don't know, rocket fuel for the whole revolution. He wrote these 2 treatises of government where he argued that the whole point of government is to protect individual rights. And if a government doesn't do that, well, the people have a right to overthrow it.
That's pretty radical, especially for back then.
Oh, absolutely. It was revolutionary. And it's like he provided the intellectual framework. And then the Glorious Revolution was the moment when those ideas were actually put into practice. And it wasn't just in England either. His ideas spread and they inspired revolutions and reform movements all over the world.
So we're talking about a global impact. The Glorious Revolution, it wasn't just a British thing. It was a turning point in the fight for individual freedom and limited government everywhere.
It was a big deal, a real game changer.
But let's not get too caught up in the big picture. Because as much as the Glorious Revolution was about high-minded ideals and political maneuvering, it also had very real consequences for everyday people. It wasn't just happening in some abstract realm.
Right, right. It affected how people lived their lives, how they practiced their religion, how their economy worked.
So let's talk about that, starting with religion. We know England was still predominantly Protestant. But did the Glorious Revolution change anything for people who weren't part of the Church of England?
It did, but maybe not as much as some people had hoped. The revolution led to more religious tolerance, but it was mostly for other Protestant denominations. Catholics were still facing discrimination, couldn't hold public office, that sort of thing.
It's like one step forward, but two steps back, in a way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, some progress, but not a complete victory for religious freedom.
Got it. Now, what about the economy? The research makes it sound like there were some pretty major transformations happening there.
Oh, yeah, the economic changes were huge. I mean, in some ways, you could argue they were even more significant than the political changes.
Really? Tell me more about that.
Okay, so before the revolution, England's financial system was a bit of a disaster. I mean, there were constant money shortages, their banking system was weak, and nobody really trusted the government to manage finances responsibly.
Sounds like a recipe for, well, economic disaster.
Yeah, pretty much. But the Glorious Revolution, it led to what historians call the financial revolution.
Okay, that sounds dramatic. What exactly was the financial revolution?
It wasn't just a few small changes. It was like they hit the reset button on England's entire financial system. And it laid the foundation for England becoming a global economic powerhouse in the centuries that followed.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued now.
Yeah.
So what were the big changes that made this financial revolution so revolutionary?
All right, so one of the biggest things was the establishment of the Bank of England in 1694.
A national bank. Did they just invent that concept?
Well, it was pretty new at the time, and this bank, it was privately owned, but it also acted as the government's banker, and it played a huge role in managing the national debt, which, by the way, was another big innovation that came out of this period.
Okay, so a national bank and national debt. What impact did all this have on the actual economy?
Oh, it had a massive impact. The Bank of England, it helped stabilize the currency, which had been all over the place before, and it made it a lot easier for the government to borrow money because now there was this, like, trusted institution backing them up. And all of that led to more investment, more economic growth, a surge in trade.
So from religious tolerance to a financial revolution, the Glorious Revolution really touched every aspect of English life. It wasn't just about who sat on the throne. But the research makes it clear that even such a transformative event had its share of complexities, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, history is never a simple story. And to really understand the Glorious Revolution, we need to look at it from multiple angles. We need to think about the perspectives of the people who lived through it, the debates that were happening at the time, the different ways that people interpreted what was going on.
And that's where the Whigs and the Tories come in, right?
Yeah.
These two main political factions in England at the time. They had very different views on what the Glorious Revolution meant, what it achieved, what its legacy should be.
Yeah, their differing viewpoints, they show how even a seemingly straightforward event like a revolution, I mean, it's not really straightforward at all, is it? It was really nuanced and open to interpretation. It just goes to show that history is never black and white.
Okay, so let's break these factions down a bit. Who were the Whigs? What was their take on the Glorious Revolution?
The Whigs, they were the revolution's biggest fans. Like, they were all about it. They saw it as this huge victory for liberty, a triumph over tyranny. It was proof, in their minds, that a limited monarchy and a powerful parliament, that was the way to go. For them, it was a sign of progress, a step towards a more just and equal society.
Okay, so the Whigs were feeling pretty good about things. What about the Tories? Were they as enthusiastic?
Not so much. The Tories had a more complicated relationship with the whole thing. Some of them supported the changes, but others were a lot more skeptical, you know? Remember, Tories generally favored a stronger monarchy. They weren't so keen on Parliament having all the power.
So they probably saw it as Parliament overstepping its bounds, potentially creating instability down the line.
Yeah, that was a big concern for them. It's interesting, right? You got this event, the Glorious Revolution, with this grand name, and even within that event, there's this whole spectrum of opinions, anxieties.
And that's what makes history so fascinating. It's not just about dates and battles and kings and queens. It's about people. It's about the people who lived through these events and how they made sense of them. It's about understanding that even revolutions, even those that seem like they're on the side of, good or progress, even those have unintended consequences. Change is messy. It's never a clean break from the past.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the causes of the Glorious Revolution to its effects on religion, on the economy, on the very structure of the English government. But before we wrap up, I want to zoom out for a minute and think about the revolution's legacy. How did it shape not just England, but the whole concept of democracy, the way we think about government today?
Now, that's a big question, one that takes us beyond just England into like the core of how we think about power and freedom in the modern world.
I mean, the Glorious Revolution wasn't just about getting rid of one king. It was about establishing principles that would echo through history. Principles like parliamentary supremacy, the importance of individual rights, the idea that a government can't just rule by force, it needs the consent of the people.
Absolutely. And those ideas, they didn't stay in England, they spread. They influenced revolutions and reform movements all over the world. The Glorious Revolution, it showed people that change was possible. It showed that even those systems that seem untouchable, those can be challenged. It showed that people can have a say in how they're governed.
It's a powerful legacy, and it's one that continues to inspire us today. But it's important to remember that history is rarely a simple story of good guys versus bad guys. And the Glorious Revolution is no exception.
Right. We often focus on the positive aspects, but it's crucial to acknowledge that it wasn't all like peaceful protests and philosophical debates. There was violence, especially for those outside of England.
Yeah, the research mentions some pretty intense conflicts in Scotland and Ireland where James II still had a lot of support.
Yeah. It's a reminder that even revolutions that are fought for, noble goals, they can still have unintended consequences. The path to freedom, it's often paved with really difficult choices and compromises.
And it reminds us that history isn't just about grand narratives and big pronouncements. It's about people's lives, their experiences, the sacrifices they made, the decisions they wrestled with. It's about recognizing that the past is complicated.
So true.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the Glorious Revolution, I want to try something a little different. Let's imagine, just for a moment, that we could time travel.
Oh, I'm game. Take me back.
Let's go back to 1688, right when all this is about to go down. Imagine we're standing there, in the midst of all the tension and uncertainty.
It'd be like stepping into a history book.
Exactly. So here's the question. If we were alive during the Glorious Revolution, if we had to pick a side, which would it be? Whig or Tory? And what parts of their arguments would we find most compelling?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Honestly, I think I'd be drawn to the Whigs' emphasis on individual liberties. That idea of putting limits on the power of the monarch, that resonates with me. But I'd also be wary of, Parliament gaining too much power, which was a concern for some of the Tories. It's interesting to think about how our modern values would line up with or clash with the political landscape of 17th century England.
It's a good reminder that the past isn't really that far away. It still shapes how we think and how we live today. And for our listeners, well, maybe this deep dive has sparked some new questions for you, a desire to learn more about the Glorious Revolution and its impact on the world.
I hope so. Because as much as we've talked about today, there's always more to discover.
Yeah.
More layers to peel back, more perspectives to consider. And that's what makes history so endlessly fascinating.
Well said. So if this has piqued your interest, we highly recommend checking out the research plan we used for this episode. It's got all the juicy details, primary sources, all sorts of interesting analyses that will take you even deeper into this period.
Yeah, it's like a backstage pass to the Glorious Revolution. You can explore the events, the people, the arguments, all of it.
And who knows, you might even find something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the Glorious Revolution.
Or discover some little historical detail that totally changes your perspective.
That's the amazing thing about history. There's always something new to learn, some other angle to consider.
It's like a giant puzzle. There are always more pieces to find.
So we encourage you, don't just passively listen to this and move on. Let it spark your curiosity. Go check out the sources. Ask your own questions.
Challenge your assumptions.
Think about those different perspectives. And consider how the events of 1688, how they're still shaping the world we live in today.
Yeah, because history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the present, and it's about shaping the future.
And who knows, maybe by exploring the Glorious Revolution, you'll be inspired to create your own revolution, big or small, in the world around you.
Until our next deep dive, happy exploring.
And you know what? If all this talk about the Glorious Revolution has you, itching to learn more, we highly recommend checking out the research plan we used for this episode.
It's really cool. They've got so much detail in there, primary sources, different analyses. You can really get lost in it.
It's true. You can really go down the rabbit hole. And who knows, maybe you'll find something that makes you totally rethink what you thought you knew about the Glorious Revolution.
Yeah, or maybe you'll stumble on some little historical detail that just completely blows your mind and changes your whole perspective.
That's the thing about history. It's like there's always something new to discover.
Always another side to the story.
So yeah, as we wrap up this deep dive, our challenge to you is this. Don't just listen and forget about it. Let it spark something in you.
Go explore those sources. Ask your own questions.
Don't be afraid to challenge the things you thought you knew.
See things from different points of view.
And really think about it. How are the events of 1688? How are they still shaping our world today?
Because history, it's not just about the past, right? It's about understanding where we come from.
It's about seeing how the choices people made, how they still affect us.
And ultimately, it's about using that knowledge to build a better future.
So, until our next deep dive, keep those questions coming.
And keep exploring.